Started, and here, Billy, let me get your paperwork real quick.
Okay.
Then we'll get started. Okay.
Just stay out of the way of the camera. The big head was in the way of the camera last time.
Is that right?
You saw the back of my head.
No, I saw, yes.
Actually, it doesn't really.
I knew you were there.
It doesn't really. It makes no difference. However, it's interesting that we do have people following along at home. They're following along, because I get their feedback on communication. So we got people who are watching it, and which is nice. That's why we're doing that. So we're a bigger class than we look. I can assure you of that. We got more people than I realize that have been watching this. So why don't we go on and open up with prayer, and then I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit, so a little bit more understanding as to what not just what the different views of Revelation are, but before we get into it, what the popular view of Revelation is. Then we'll continue on into the next few parts, and that's why you need your written material, and then we will get on into the text. So why don't we open with a quick word of prayer, and then we'll move on. Lord, blessed be with us as we come on this beautiful morning to continue our study of Revelation, to let this vision of John speak to us in our hearts, to come to learn to understand it from the historical point of view, Lord, and then, Lord, how we read it and understand it for our lives and for our faith. Thank you for bringing us here safely. We thank you, Lord, for those who are watching at home as well, or wherever they may be. Keep us all in your loving care. And thank you for all good gifts. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go back, and I want you to start with your stapled material a little bit this morning. I'm going to head back up here to slide 30. 29 actually. And what I want to do is drill down, just so I feel like I just real briefly drill down into these approaches so that we'll understand them a little better, because I kind of, I'm going through my notes, but I don't have all this written down for you, so I wanted to write a little more down. So we talked about the 5 different views of Revelation last week. The first one is called the preterist. And here's a better explanation than I gave you of it. Everybody got the first page? See the events of Revelation, for the most part, to have been fulfilled in the first centuries of the church age, either at the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, or at both the fall of Jerusalem and later at the fall of Rome in the 5th century. The book was written, preterists say, to comfort Christians who suffered persecution at the hands of Romans and Jews. Many biblical scholars favor the preterist view. So if you go from the view of scholarship, this is the view most of them adopt. Okay, they look strictly back. Now, what's the difference between that and the historical view, or the historicists? The historicists view the events of Revelation as unfolding throughout the course of history. This view meshed with the thinking of the Protestant reformers, who equated the papal system of their day with the Apostle John's vision of the Antichrist. This view largely has fallen out of favor due to the difficulties of matching historical events to biblical prophecy, requiring constant revision. So that's a perfect example of that, isn't it? I mean, the Reformation leaders used Revelation as a justification for what they were doing in bringing about the Protestant Reformation, but time went on. It didn't end with the Protestant Reformation. The apocalypse did not happen. So now you have to keep revising historically, okay? Which is kind of Hal Lindsey's point of view. I mean, he has to keep revising, and others, the historical facts. Leo, let me get you our paperwork here real quick before we, hang on, give me just a second here. I just want to get you our paperwork today. No problem. There you go. Okay? And we're starting with that first page I gave you on the staple page. So you see why that would have been a problem. Okay, now, the futurists, that's the third one, argue that the events of Revelation are largely unfulfilled, especially chapters 4 through 22. In a few minutes, we're going to drill down into the futuristic, or what I call the popular view. Premillennialists tend to embrace a futurist interpretation of the apocalypse. And while many scholars favor the preterist view, it may be said that the masses prefer the futurist interpretation. There's Hal Lindsey's, not Hal Lindsey, there's the Left Behind series. It's the popular view the popular view. And I have a theory that what we're seeing today in parts of Christianity being wrapped up in political events is not evangelical Christianity. It's populist Christianity, what I call pop Christianity. It's pop Christianity. Christianity that really isn't geared toward the sake of Christianity itself, but more toward issues, emotional issues that affect the politics of the day. So I would relabel that, because I think evangelical Christianity is I think all Christianity to some degree is evangelical. Because evangelical simply means the good news, sharing the good news. But I think that popular Christianity is a better label for that, or pop Christianity. So, and futurist is an example, I think. Futurism in Revelation is a very good example of pop Christianity, a view of Revelation from the view of pop Christianity. The idealists see Revelation as setting forth timeless truths concerning the battle between good and evil, a battle that continues throughout the church age. Instead of predicting future events, Revelation inspires and encourages believers of all times as they endure persecution at the hands of God's enemies. So this is the more theological view. This takes like more of the philosophical and theological theories or ideas and applies them to Revelation. And finally, the eclectics, which, as I stated, is more of the Reformed view today. The Reformed view today, it gleaned the strengths of the other four views while avoiding their pitfalls. Many leading evangelical scholars, and again, let's remember evangelical scholars, we are evangelical Christians in the sense of our, in the way that we proclaim Christ as the good news, today have embraced the eclectic approach, arguing that it provides a balanced approach to Scripture. So, in other words, there's not one really narrow approach we need to take. We can get something out of each of these approaches that are important. Yeah, and that generally, I think, is the one that most of us, at least in the mainline church or in the Reformed church, agree with, the one we approach. Now, I wanted to drill down a little bit. If you look at the next staple page, now this has the four interpretations of Revelation. It leads off the eclectic, but these are the four more narrow interpretations. If you look, it just gives a little chart here, okay? The four interpretations of Revelations. Preterism was fulfilled before 400 AD. 500 it said on the other one, but 400 AD. Being fulfilled, in other words, the historical view is happening, it's in the midst. Idealism, no historical fulfillment. It just is more of a general point of view. And then to be fulfilled. Futurism is to be fulfilled. So this is kind of a chart that lays out how these are understood. Now the next one is a drill down of the futurist point of view, or the dispensational theory of Revelations that they used from Revelations to create this view. And this is really the engine of the futurist view, okay? So if you look at the way they put all this together, and this is the view that is represented by the Left Behind series. This is the view that's represented by Hal Lindsey and others. This is the more fundamental, or if you want to say popular Christian view. I call it popular Christian view, okay? So it begins with correlation. Everybody look at the top. Correlation with the kingdom parables, prophecies of the church age. And there's the sower of the seed, the wheat and the tares, the mustard seed, the leaven, the treasure, the pearl, the net. And then the 10 virgins and the talents and stewards right below that. Then the 7 churches from Revelation are used to describe a particular age of the church. The 7 ages that represent all of God's work from beginning to end with the church. So Ephesus, which is Revelation 2, 1 through 7, and we'll be looking at all these churches, represents in this view the first church age, which is 33 to 100 AD, the death of Christ, the first and second persecution. Everybody see what I'm looking at? The next one, Smyrna, Revelation 2, 8 through 11, represents the second church age, according to this point of view. 100 through 312 AD, the Caesars, the second through the 10th persecutions. Pergamos, the church of Pergamos, Revelation 2, 12 through 17, represents the third church age, which begins this and Alexandrian school of thought, the Alexandrian school of thought, and then that's 312 through 590, the church where Constantine, the political church, 312 through, which they have labeled the political church, and then 590 through 517, Thyatira, in the fourth church age, 590 through 517 AD, the Middle Dark Ages, the idolatrous church or Catholic church. You notice how these labels are just kind of stuck. Yeah, remember, this is all arbitrary, folks. This is all arbitrary, okay? Somebody just sat down and wrote this out. And then the fifth church age, represented by Sardis, Revelation 3, 1 through 6, the Reformation and Protestantism, 1517 through 1750 AD. And if you ask me why they end the Reformation at 1750 AD, I have absolutely zero idea. Zero. And then the fifth church age, represented by Sardis, 1517 through 1750. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. The sixth church age, represented by Philadelphia, which represents the missionary movement, 1750 through 1925 AD. Now, why is 1925 AD? Yeah, nobody knows. I mean, what I mean is, it's just an arbitrary. I mean, sure, the writer of the theory will point to events, but it's just, nobody knows. And then finally, the Laodicean, Revelations 3, 14 through 22, which is the seventh church age, which began, by the way, in 1925 AD, and ends at the end, and that's the apostate church, which is every church which isn't a church that these folks agree with. I'm not kidding about that. That's exactly what that is. So you can see that this is what is called dispensationalism, which was written around in the late 1800s and developed in the early 1900s. What it was, I'll tell you what it was. It was an emotional political reaction to the critical approach to interpreting the Bible, the critical theory, the historical critical approach, which is used, regularly in the Reform movement now, in seminaries and in others. You study the historical critical approach rather than the inerrant approach. So this is an inerrant interpretation of Revelation, but its main purpose is to be critical of the historical critical approach. It's not to actually try to interpret Revelation, because it's literally laying a framework on top of what's already there. And once we read these seven churches, we'll see that they really don't relate to anything that's written down here at the bottom. I mean, right away, you'll see that. So it's someone's, it's the difference between a translation and an interpretation. That's what we talk about when we talk about what Bible versions we're going to study. Do we study? And some interpretations are very good. The Good News Bible. I love the Good News Bible. The Phillips Bible. I love the Phillips Bible. But they are not translations. They're interpretations. Someone took a translation and put their view to it. On the other hand, like the RSV, NRSV, King James, and others, they were translations, pure translations. So, so the reason that we have in the Bible, the reason that we've, for example, taken the King James and made newer translations is because we get better translations of the Greek. Because we discover, as the better archaeology gets, the earlier text from the Bible it discovers, and that adjusts things that we have better materials, historical materials now of these texts than they had in the time of King James. So it's that constant look at reinterpreting based upon fragments and things we found. I don't want to get into how the text was put together, but it helps to understand biblical interpretation a little bit. Now, the final page that I want you to look at there in that stapled group is a study of premillennial theory. Now, the reason that I brought this up is this is a little bit drilled down more into dispensationalism. We are not premillennialists. All that other group, except for the futurists, would be called either millennialist or post-millennialist. The preterist would be post-millennialist. The idealist and the eclectic to some degree would be millennialist. In other words, we are in that age now, but the futurists are premillennial. And this is the layout of how they view the historical schematic scheme of Revelations. And you'll see that the way it's laid out here, I just want to run through it real quick. Israel first, personal ministry, kingdom postponed, Christ fails. I don't know exactly what that means. Why it says Christ fails. Then we come to the church age, and then we come to the rapture. So we're in the church age. We're waiting for the rapture, the resurrection of the righteous. And there they go up, right? For 7 years of paradise. And during that 7 years, everybody with me as we go across left to right, are the tribulation on earth, the 7 years. The temple is then rebuilt during those 7 years. Then we head back into time again, where the Battle of Armageddon, at the end of that 7 years, the 1,000-year reign begins. The Battle of Armageddon, the rest of the saints, of the tribulation saints, the judgment of the saints, the kingdom established, the Jews return, and Satan bound. Then comes the 1,000-year reign on earth, and then comes the judgment of the wicked who are raised, and then the final in heaven, eternity righteous, and hell, eternity wicked. Now, this is just an example of one way to scheme out those chapters 4 through 19. And this is exactly what they've done. They've schemed it out. Yep, they've schemed it out. So you see, this is why Christians avoid Revelation a lot. Because it's so easy to make it into just about anything you want it to be. But I happen to believe it's well worth studying for us and for the church. Because I think taking that eclectic view, it has truth to it that we need to understand. I'm going to trust those early church leaders who decided to leave Revelation in the canon. And if that's the case, what does it have to say to us? What does it have to say? When you put Revelation into your sermon topics, you know you're going to draw an interesting crowd. Sometimes. But you have a lot of people going, well, why are they preaching on Revelation? I mean, you know what? They're going to be preaching on, Hal Lindsey or on Left Behind or on they're always thinking in the popular mode, the futurist mode. Always. And that's not fair. That just happens to be the dominant conversation, the dominant view. That's what's been written about. That's what all those movies you see. Did I tell you last week, there's right now a show on called Rat-Pocalypse. I have no idea. Rat-Pocalypse. Don't ask me. But it's clearly Rat-Pocalypse. Just the title.
Sounds like a new music.
I know. It's just going to be based on that view. So any of these movies are based upon that view. So it's like the popular view has the floor. But there is another view. In fact, quite a few other views that are well worth our looking into. So now I'm going to drop ahead to where we left off last week, which is where we get to the symbolism. And I'm going to jump down here. Let me find it. Okay. We're going to talk now about the symbolism, okay? And we're going to go into that symbolism. Then we're going to look at the numerology real quick. And we're just going to move right through till we begin the text. So thank you for your patience on that. But I want us to clearly understand these viewpoints because they're very, very important to how we approach Revelation. And the misunderstandings, the clear, just like I said, the distortion of what Revelation is all about. Okay, so let's go into the symbolism. Okay, so we have to remember that Revelation is pictorial. It is. Why would it make sense that it would be written in such a clearly pictorial way? Why? Why would that make perfect sense? That John would have written it in a pictorial way.
A lot of people did not read.
Exactly correct. It was written for people who generally didn't read. So they had to use these images. In fact, what I think one of the most interesting theories that I've read recently, not theories, but I think facts about understanding Revelation is don't read it as if you're reading it. Read it as if you're hearing it. So then you'll understand, especially in the numerology, they put in breaks for the listeners to introduce different sections. And that's so that here, so they'll put in these little numerical breaks to say, okay, now we're moving to the 4.7, the 7, the 12, and it's so they can keep up with the transitions. Because it was really for listeners, it wasn't for readers, okay? And that makes a huge difference. That's why we as readers struggle with it sometimes. But as listeners, they would have recognized these transitions from one section to the next. And I think that's a really important understanding as we get into it. So a revelation, if you look at the literal definition, a revelation is one through the medium of a symbolic heavenly vision communicated through an angel. That's what the revelation is. It's through a medium of symbolic heavenly visions communicated through an angel. So now we're going to look at these 4 levels real quick of revelation, okay? Of this symbolic communication. The first is the linguistic level, which is the record of the text. The text had to be read. It was a consistent text. They didn't hand an outline. They gave, John wrote a text to be read. So there is the record of the text. The next level is the visionary level, as you see, which is what John sees, okay? John's visionary experience. This is what I saw. Then there is the referential level, which is the historical identification with objects seen in the vision. There are things in the vision that refer to real things these people would have known, okay? It could go back into the Old Testament history. It could go back into Genesis. But these things would be references. Nero, like the 666, people would have known. There's a real reference there. And that makes for us Revelations very tricky to interpret. The Revelation tricky to interpret because we don't know all those references. Yeah, exactly. It uses a popular language of its time. Imagine taking our television and letting people from Mars or from 1,000 years ago look at our television. They're going to go, makes no sense whatsoever. Makes no sense. Or 1,000 years from now, looking at it and going, what is this? We don't understand what this is at all. So it's that kind of thing. And then finally, the symbolic level. And this is the symbolic level, even though we're talking about symbolic communication, the symbolic level is simply how we interpret these symbols. How do we interpret the symbols on the symbolic level? What do they mean to us? Since these symbols are there, and we do believe that the Revelation was written for the church, for all time, how are we to interpret it? So, we're going to take a passage, and we're going to drill down into these 4 levels just to show you how it works. And we're going to take Revelation 19, 7 through 8. And why don't we read it together, okay? Let's just read this passage together, all right? Revelation 19, 7 through 8. Everybody ready? Can everybody see it? Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. To her it has been granted to be clothed with fine linen, bright and pure. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Perfect example of how we can look at these 4 levels of communication, of understanding. So obviously the linguistic level is exactly what we just read. It's the words, okay? So the next level is the visionary level, and that is the bride and the fine garments. There's that's what we, and the lamb. There's other visions in there. The lamb, the bride, the fine garments, bright and pure. These are all images that we can relate to. There's the referential level, which is the what does this mean for the readers, what does it mean? What did it mean for the readers of the time? And it reflected their joy in their communion with Christ. The bride and the lamb, these are joyful images, and the readers at that time would have related it to their joy at the communion with Christ. They would have understood that immediately, okay? It's something that we might have to, we don't use, when we talk about the joy of the communion with Christ, we wouldn't use that language, would we? We might use other types of language, okay, to talk about our joy with the communion of Christ. But they would. That's the images and the language that they would use. We might use a different image. From the Reformation, we get the communion of the saints. Communion of the saints. Now, what does that mean? Well, when we say communion of the saints, we understand what that means. That is, we don't talk about communion as a sacrament, but our fellowship, But that's not the language they use. They use this kind of language. And then finally, the symbolic level, whatever we determine to be the precise meaning of the wedding imagery and the communion of the bride with the bridegroom. So we can have our own understanding of this. There is an interpretation here for us at the end, isn't there? For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. In other words, there is a definition telling us this is what this means. So, what does that mean to us? The righteous deeds of the saints. What does that mean? How do we understand that? Do we, if I'm going to preach on this, I can preach on the righteous deeds of the saints. What does that mean? Well, can we think about when we talk about righteous deeds, we're not talking about the deeds maybe that save us, because we're saved by grace, but we're talking about that which proceeds out of our salvation. Because once we come to Christ, we become part of the saints. Then, that which we do as a community, for example, our food bank might be what we would describe as a righteous deed of the saints. See? What we do together as the church in the world. We have our sinning too, but then grace is that was the answer to that. So, that's how I might interpret that. You see what I mean? And that would be the symbolic level for us, okay? So I could actually preach that passage. I'd have to use a lot of other support for it too. But I can preach that passage. Based upon that interpretation of that image. Okay? And I might even start with the illustration of the joy of a wedding. What happens at weddings are supposed to happen at weddings. Exactly. I said the joy of the wedding itself. I didn't say the preparation for the wedding. I didn't say that. In an age of Bridezilla, that might be a real hard sermon to pull off. Okay?
No, it's the father paying for the wedding.
You're right. That joy is very limited, isn't it? My daughter's not married yet, so we're not married yet. Well, it's a different time, So anyway, so any questions about these four levels? I wanted us to understand these four levels to show that as we approach this, we are going to be looking, when we come to these passages, at some of these bring out immediately a certain level. Especially when we get to like chapter 4 and afterwards, we're really focusing on the visionary level because it's just all vision. But in the letter to the 7 churches, we're focusing highly on the referential level and the symbolic level, because the 7 churches refer to real things that were happening in those churches at that time, and they have meaning for us. So you see, that's where we won't be worried so much about the visionary level. We'll see visions in the 7 churches. 7 candle stands, 7 candlesticks, da-da-da-da-da. But we'll be more interested in the churches themselves. But when we get to chapter 4 and onward, then we really are working in that visionary level field. So, but for each of these, there is a way to understand this. I want us to understand. Any question about that or comment about that? Anything? Okay. All right then. Let's move on then to the next part, which is numerology. And I don't want to spend a lot of time in numerology, but the reason I'm sharing numerology with you is, first of all, it's there. We can't avoid it. So what do we do with it? Furthermore, I think the best thing about understanding the numerology is that it helps us to understand the precision and the complexity with which Revelation was written. It is absolutely amazing. Now, most apocalypse is that way. Most apocalyptic writing is that way. Numerology is, not only does numerology inform apocalyptic writing, we see it in, where do we see it in the gospel? Where do we see numbers being important in the gospel? Give me an example.
How often do you forgive?
Oh, good. Excellent. How many times?
70 times 7.
And what is 7? What is the meaning of 7?
That's the fullness.
The fullness is the, yeah, exactly. Forever. Completely. Perfect example. Give me another example of numerology in the gospel.
Trinity.
The Trinity. Excellent. 3. Excellent. What else?
And the 12.
Yes.
12 apostles.
Which represented what?
The 12 tribes.
Exactly. And 12 is a number, again, of God's completeness. So there are consistent numbers. And here's what's amazing about Revelation, in the just the precision. No wonder we believe it took so many years to get written. Because when it comes to all those things in Revelation that refer to God, the saints, everything that is on the God side, those numbers are there. Those same numbers are never used when talking about Satan or the emperor, except as a mocking of the number. The number 666 is the closest number to what? 7. 7. See what I mean? So when the numbers are used in regards to the negative aspects of judgment and of the cities and the beast and all this, the numbers don't fit in. They don't use the 4, the 7, the 12, the 3. They don't use those numbers, except as a poor imitation of. So let me just to show you the complexity of this. The numerology is 3, 4, 7, 12, and their multiples. 3, 4, 7, 12. We talked about 7 as the number of completion. The number 4, north, south, east, west, earth, wind, fire. You know, you can go into all kinds of spatial. 4 is the spatial number. So if 7 is kind of the eternal number, then the numerology, then 4 is the geography. So when you have a numerology and a passage that is 4 by 7, 28, and it's there a lot, sometimes written as 4 by 7. Some of these visions are written 4 visions, followed by 7 visions, followed by 4 visions. That is all intentional. And just to prove it to you, you're going to have to bear with me. We're going to read this, okay? And this is the only time we'll dwell into the numerology like this, but it is such an amazing summary of it. And the only reason I'm reading this is for one reason. So you can see the complexity of how Revelation was put together. So you see that little mark there on the left side of this. Everybody got it? All right, that's where I'm going to start, and then we'll stop at the mark. I know it's tiny, so it's tiny for me too. And believe it or not, this is as big a page as I can make on it. I used a big 11 by whatever it is. Not 17, 11 by 24, whatever it is. Okay, 11 by 24. There's some numbers too. So, all right, the following examples are the most notable in Bauckham. Bauckham has put together an incredible. I have his original book at home, and he put together all this from his study of the numerology. The 7 Beatitudes, and we'll be looking at the 7 Beatitudes, indicate the complete blessing on God's people and may even serve as a summary of Revelation's message about salvation. There are 7 Beatitudes. Blessed be. Blessed be. The number 4 is the number of cosmic completeness, as in the earth's 4 corners and 4 winds. Further indication of this meaning comes from 5:13, where creatures in 4 sectors of the cosmos offer a 4-fold doxology to God and the Lamb. Elsewhere, when the world is referred to, it is also divided into 4 parts. These 4 parts of earth are the targets of the first 4 trumpets, the first 4 bowls, which demonstrate God's judicial power over all creation. In this respect, the division of the seals, trumpets, and bowls into a 4+3 pattern is partially the result of designing the first 4 to be judgments on the world. Here, Bauckham could have appealed to 501 creation, which repeatedly mentions 4 and 3 as key components of the number 7, even explicitly saying that 7, being made up as it is of 3 and 4, is a presentation of all that is naturally steadfast and upright in the universe. Bauckham notes that there are even 4 series of 7 judgments, if we include the series rescinded in 10:3 through 7. Here, 4 times 7 underscores the connotation of complete judgments on the entire world, which is consistent with Leviticus 26, where the threat of a 7-fold judgment on Israel is repeated how many times? 4 times. Perhaps the 7-fold repetition of sickle in the short space of 6 verses denotes the completeness of worldwide judgment. In this connection, it is probably not coincidental that the list of imports from the merchants of the earth to Babylon has 28 items, 4 by 7, which thus represent the totality of products from the entire world. This is all written intentionally. None of this is coincidental. The 4-fold formula, every tribe, tongue, people, and nation in different orders, is used how many times? 7 times to indicate all humanity on earth. Through the first 2 occurrences in 5 and 7:9 refer to the redeemed and other occurrences to the unredeemed. Certain names of God and Christ are also repeated in patterns of 4 and 7. The phrase, the one who lives forever and ever, is applied to God 4 times in order to designate him as the everlasting creator who rules over creation, space, 4 times. The complete title, the Lord God Almighty, and the title, the one who sits on the throne, both occur 7 times. Additional variations of the first phrase are used probably to preserve the number 7. Similarly, the self-designations of Christ and God as the Alpha and the Omega, and the equivalent ascriptions appear 7 times. The name Christ appears 7 times, and name Jesus, guess what? 14 times. The Lamb is used of Christ 28 times. 7 bringing the Lamb and God together. The 7 by 4 appearances of this title underscore the universal scope of the Lamb's complete victory. The 7 spirits are mentioned 4 times to signify the fullness of divine sovereignty, which is sent out into all the earth, probably through the church's prophetic witness. In this respect, prophecy is referred to 7 times. To underscore the idea of the Spirit's full sovereignty, the word Spirit is used 14 times. 7 of these appear in the repeated refrain at the end of each of the letters, and 4 others in the 4-fold repetition of in the Spirit, referring to the full effectiveness of John's prophetic commission. We're almost done. Significantly, this is what I was talking about. No such numerical patterns for the names of Satan, the beast, or the false prophet can be observed except when they parody God or Christ. 12 is the number of God's people, which is squared to indicate completeness, 144, and multiplied by 1,000 to connote vastness. This number is so significant that 12 occurs 12 times in the betrayal of the New Jerusalem as an image of the end-time completeness of the saints. I'm going to stop right there. It goes on for a little bit longer. Yeah?
Then it's probably no accident that we refer to the 7 seas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is, I don't know where that comes from, so I can't say for sure that would be the case. The 7 seas is not a revelation. Yeah, that's more of a geographical. But if we talk, it could be metaphorical when we talk about the 7 seas as all the waters of the world, all the seas of the world. It could be metaphorical as well, or salad dressing, whichever one you want to do. You know? But you can see, what I wanted you to see is the intricate way Revelation is put together. It's amazing every even the images are put together and certain patterns are put in there. We don't recognize the patterns. We just see the images. But if we go back and count, these patterns emerge. So it's pretty amazing. I mean, this work has just recently been done. So this is kind of a new revelation out of Revelation at how complex the numerology is.
I'm beginning to see why they're questioning whether 1 John
Yes, yeah.
could have.
Or 1 John over a period of many, many years.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it would make sense if you were putting, let's say, a middle part vision together with an end part to blend these parts together through the numerology. And also remember that these numbers, some of these numbers are breaks for readers. So you go through like, okay, you go through the first 4 or the first 7, and everybody's kind of counting as they hear. Then you stop, and you're getting ready now for the next 7. So it's like a commercial or a break of some type. You know, here's your next break. Now here's the next 7. Here's the next series. So in other words, since it's written for oral presentation, it's organized so you can organize it in your mind. They were from a culture that had to hear and then interpret. So how did you do that? You had to organize it as you heard it so you would hear it. And it's quite amazing what a talent they developed for accurate reinterpretation of this stuff. We're in a reading culture. We don't bother trying to organize these things in our head as we read it because we know we can pass it on to the next person for them to read. They didn't have that. So they had to write it in order for the way people thought back then, the way their brains were wired, to be able to organize it for reinterpretation to the next. So now I know, having heard it, I can go do now the 777. Organized in 4 by 3, or 4 plus 3, 4 plus 3, 4 plus 3. See what I mean? So it's very, very complex book, extremely complex.
Would that be common in ancient Jewish
Yes. Yes.
writing?
Yes, very much.
Is that the reason why you were saying at the beginning that maybe the author
Yes.
was a Jewish?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It's common in apocalyptic writing. We don't see it so much later in Roman and other languages that emerge, but it's very common out of Jewish apocalyptic. And very common in late, that was adopted by Christian apocalyptic. Yes, that is a very, if you go back and read Daniel, if you go back and read some parts of Isaiah, you'll see the numerical structure put together, especially in Daniel, same thing.
This is a little bit off, but in the Mayan culture and some of the other cultures that have grown around the world.
Yeah, please talk about that.
Well, it was really a question to you. Do we find a similar?
Of course, yeah.
Mathematical.
Yeah, you found that, yeah, yeah. Now, not necessarily, I would have to study how mathematical symbolism works in their mythology. I mean, if you look at the Roman gods, you don't see a lot. If you look at the myths of the Romans and the Greeks, you don't see a lot of numerical. I'm not a Greek or Roman scholar as far as mythology, and someone could correct me, but I don't think you see a lot of numerical symbolism, at least the myths I have read. They're more stories, unless somebody can want to correct me. I mean, how many heads does the Hydra have? How many heads does, what, 7? 7? Yeah? Yeah. How many, well, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, we would have to look back at Roman and Greek mythology to find the numerology of it, to see how it matches up. But numerology clearly is a binding force in apocalyptic. And when asking the reason why, I think it is as simple as saying it's a way of organizing oral interpretation. I mean, yeah, it can have, I mean, look, 666 has nothing to do with oral interpretation. It has to do with a symbol of understanding. But when you look at the way these multiples work, 3, 4, 12, 3, 4, 7, 28, all these, they do organize things. They put things into organization. and I'm more and more, after reading this and studying this, because, I'm always picking up new stuff, I'm beginning to wonder if this wasn't just a binding way in an oral culture to transmit these complex images, rather than to be saying something absolute about the symbiology. Not that 7 doesn't have a base meaning, which it does, but 7 times 4 may be an organizational tool, right? You see what I'm saying? 3, Trinity, but 3 times 4 may simply be an organizational way to hear something. So I don't know. I don't know, but I'm just saying that. And that's a really good question to ask. I wish I knew the answer to that. I know that certainly in Egyptian culture, ancient Egyptian culture, and in others, we do see remarkable mathematical
Well, I was very
accuracy.
impressed with the Mayan.
The Mayan culture, yeah. But now I don't know how deep their mythology goes
And that's,
into the numerology.
Well, it would take a guy like Bachman to.
Yeah. To
I, for one,
understand.
would not want to try to. I can't even imagine the time that it took for him to put this together.
Well, no, but I'm saying he's taken the work that others had built, and he's just gone deeper into it now and said, it's amazing. It really is amazing. In other words, he said, we've seen these numbers, but no one's done a complete analysis of how they're put together. He did a complete analysis. And now a lot of the newer commentaries are taking his work, as this one did, and taking his work now and including it in their commentary to say, and I have the book where he wrote, I'll put all this together. And it's dizzy, and you read it, you just want to, because he actually puts the Greek in to show, and it put me to sleep like for 5 nights in a row. I mean, it was like a man.
You almost want to say to the guy, get a life.
Get a life, yeah. But thanks to him, I mean, that's a really important understanding to realize that the numerology really does have a purpose and a meaning. It just may not be for our time a purpose and a meaning.
I was going to say, in the ancient Ethiopian churches, the artwork there is full of this numerology. There's
Yes.
always 4s and 7s and everything.
Yeah. And what's interesting is all this that was made up out of the Da Vinci Code, which takes the extra canonical Gospels, right, and uses all this numerology, maybe just creating myth out of what was a way to organize text.
Yeah.
Organized text that was being read orally to listeners. That makes perfect sense to me. Because people get discouraged when they read Revelation and see all these numbers and patterns. Well, we can't understand it. Well, you can't understand it if you know why it was put there. And it was put there maybe to organize the text. I think it's pretty interesting. I don't know. That's why we won't get into a lot of, now that we understand maybe a little bit more of what the numerology is doing, we don't have to spend a lot of time trying to interpret it, right? We know that, we know, for example, that there were numbers of apostles, huge numbers of apostles. But, huge number of disciples, but how many apostles were there?
12.
Now, why were there 12 apostles and lots of disciples? Why was the number 12? Well, obviously, gospel interpreters will say because it was to imitate the what? The 12 tribes. The completeness and the 12 tribes. So again, there's that, so was that a way of the gospel writers to, was it a coincidence that Jesus chose 12? Or is 12 being used as a device to understand how Jesus organized things in comparison to how God organized things? To relate Jesus to God, that kind of thing. It's fascinating when you look at numerology. And you can get lost in it. You really can. And we don't want to do that. So, okay. Finally, I want to get to, in our time that we have left, before we get started in text, I want to run through use of the Old Testament. Up here, we see that Revelation draws from Pentateuch, Judges, Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Job, and the major and minor prophets. So it uses the first 5 books of the Bible and all these other ones. And more than likely, Daniel is the most influential. So if you really want to see where at least chapter 4 through 9 go through, or a little bit later than that, that pulls almost directly from Daniel, okay? Any question about that? Now let's look at the Old Testament themes real quick and try to understand those a little bit. These themes that emerge, these are Old Testament themes. End-time judgment, which again we see in Daniel. Salvation, which again in the Old Testament, what does salvation mean in the Old? Where does salvation come from in the Old Testament? Well, salvation is generally in the Old Testament, salvation is of the people, of the nation, of Israel. And it is by means of God and obedience to the law. Obedience to the law brings salvation. Holy war, that is a huge theme in the Old Testament, isn't it? A huge theme in the Old Testament. We see holy war everywhere. The story of Gideon, which we were using that story in our women's Bible study last week. The story of Gideon is a story of holy war. There's holy war everywhere there. Divine judgment, of course. We see that throughout the Old Testament. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Day of the Lord, the theme of the day of the Lord, which we find in Isaiah, which we find in Jeremiah. That theme is throughout the Old, that the day of the Lord is coming. The Lord, not the Lord's day, which we would call the Sabbath, but the day of the Lord, which is an apocalyptic idea, an end time idea. And then there are hymns from Isaiah. And interesting, I just got a book, and I'm just beginning to start researching in it. Just came out. It was a dissertation written about maybe 4 or 5 years ago that is really quite eye-opening, that shows how deeply John took from Isaiah more than we, or at least the parts of John took from Isaiah. So I'm just beginning to get into that book. And maybe by the time we get to those parts, I'll have read at least some of that book. And it's literally a publication of this person's dissertation. So, and right now, a lot of commentaries are jumping into that. A lot of the latest scholars are jumping into that to find out that there's more from Isaiah in Revelation than we realize. Okay, so now let's look at the Old Testament analogies. And when I say analogies, I mean images from the Old Testament that are applied by John to the New Testament church, that are taken literally out of the old context. And why is that important? Because remember, at the time John is writing, there is no Old Testament. There is no First Testament. John is writing at a time when there's only the Hebrew Scriptures. So before the Old Testament, before the canon was created, John takes these Old Testament themes and applies them to the New Testament, to the times that he's in of the church, which probably nobody had really done yet. Jesus in the Gospels had mentioned these and brought them up. John gives it a more complete look. For example, let's start with the image of judgment. What do we see? What are theophanies? What are theophanies? You know what a theophany is? Moses had a theophany. When did that happen? On the mountain. And was it a vision? Is a theophany a vision, or is it something bigger than that?
He met.
It's a literal visitation. It's the difference between a vision and a visitation. You know, you can have a vision, but a visitation is when you and I are standing across from each other. So Moses had a theophany. Theophanies appear. Elijah had a theophany. Remember, it was the still small voice. He thought it was in the wind. He thought it was in the lightning and the storm. And then he hears, that's a theophany. God is right there talking to him. Right? So theophany is literal. And there are theophanies that we see. John has a theophany. You know, Jesus comes to talk to him. It's not a vision. He has visions, but it is those visions are brought to him through a theophany. Books of judgment. The books of judgment. Again, we see books of judgment from the Old Testament brought into John. The Lion of Judah, that image, the Lion of Judah brought out of Old Testament is in Revelation. The term Lord of Lords, King of Kings, Lord of Lords and King of Kings, that comes from the Old Testament, but we think, well, that came out of Revelation. No, it was brought into Revelation from the Old Testament. Horsemen as agents of judgment. Once again, we think that that comes from Revelation. Doesn't. It comes from Daniel, brought into Revelation. Okay? The plagues, we obviously know that. We see plagues in Revelation. Well, we know where plagues come from in the Old Testament. Prophets giving testimony through judgment. Again, Daniel and others, et al., right? And then Babylon as a symbol. Babylon is a major symbol in the Old Testament. Even though Babylon was realistically a nation, it also became a symbol to the apocalyptic writers, the Jewish apocalyptic writers of the Old Testament. And John takes that and applies it to New Testament apocalyptic. We're almost done. Okay. Now we come to the second part, tribulation and persecution. We see tribulation and persecution in the Old Testament. So John picks that up. Seductive and idolatrous teaching. Again, an Old Testament idea. Now that's not to say that it wasn't a reality in the New Testament church. It was. But John takes the reality and codifies it into Revelation. He talks about the Nicolaitans. Well, the Nicolaitans was a real problem in the church in John's time, okay? As a Christian heresy, I guess you could call it that. But he uses the Old Testament language to describe that. Divine protection. Divine protection. That's another theme from the Old Testament. That's applied to the New. Apostasy. Apostasy. Now remember, you have to remember that when John is writing these things, they were trying to figure out what was an apostasy in the Christian church. What was it? They hadn't reached these conclusions yet. The early church was still very much a movement struggling to be an institution. And when there are movements, there are counter movements and new movements, right? And then there's the institution trying to give a blessing to the movements that it recognizes and to get rid of the movements that it doesn't. The Gnostic movement was one of those movements that, if you wonder why there are those extra canonical gospels, the movies we're talking about, those were movements that the institutional church said, no, that's not going to be a part of our canon. And that's not going to be a part of our theology, okay? So there's that selective process. Sorry, we go back. Go back. Come on. There we go. And then victorious battle of God's people over the enemy. Certainly we see that in Revelation, and we see that all over the Old Testament. I skipped that a while ago. The Spirit as the power for God's people. The early church started off at Pentecost, a spiritual event. But it had to develop a theology of the Spirit over time. And John is in the midst of when that development is beginning. So it's easy for John to borrow from the theme of the Spirit of the Lord and put it into the context of the New Testament church. Any thoughts or questions about that? You see where that's coming from, okay? Finally, believe it or not, we're almost at the beginning. We're almost there. I'm going to make sure we get to the point where we start the text next week. Theological themes in Revelations. These are look at the cartoon. Okay, no one's going to believe this without a snappy title. Let's see. The awesome moment of John. Nah. The mind-blowing story. Nah, that's no good. The eye-opener, or maybe John's tell-all book, or something like "Look out below" or "Don't look now." And that's kind of a cartoon about how John named the apocalypse. What theme was he going to use? Well, it's an apocalypse. So that's the apocalypse of John. So what are the theological themes in Revelation? Suffering and victory for both punishment and refinement. Now that's really important. It's really important. Why is it important? In apocalyptic writing in Revelation, everybody suffers. The difference is the reason. Now, why is that, how is that different from Jewish theology? How is that a major break from Jewish theology? We know that. How?
Well, the Jewish felt suffering with a punishment because you've done something wrong.
So here John puts the Christian spin on suffering in Revelation. When you suffer in Revelation, you are either suffering because of your judgment or you're suffering in order to refine your faith. And that's a major Christian theme of suffering. That's one of the major things. In fact, the fact that Christ suffered and died on the cross gives us a pinpoint for our understanding of suffering in the world, especially if you're a Christian. Suffering refines your faith. Where does your testimony come from? Not from your, not from your power, your wealth, your blessing, your luck. It comes from your suffering. Right? Most powerful testimonies are testimonies of suffering. I went through this, but my faith endured. So, suffering refines one's faith. That's really important. Why is that? We wouldn't have that now if not for, we see, whether John didn't invent that, but John took the way they were looking at it at that time and helped us to understand it in Revelation. Okay? Paul did too. Paul did the same thing. So Paul and John contributed to our understanding of Christian suffering. Jesus did it. But the gospel writers simply wrote that story. They didn't explain that. Paul explained it. John explained it. See how important that is. How do we understand suffering? Well, John tells us in Revelation. The theme of glory due to God because of full salvation and final judgment. In other words, our praise of God is not based on what's happening now in the world. That's not what we base it on. We look to something that is to come. We look to something that is to come. If you, in Jewish apocalyptic, the judgment was not held up as a victory and a triumph. It was held up as a reality that's coming. Good or bad, whatever happens, that's what's going to happen. For Christians, judgment is what we're waiting for. Or, the final is what we're waiting for. That's what we look forward to, the day of completion, this second coming, however we want to put it. So it is a glorious thing. Glory is due to God, not for the here and now, but for what is to come. What I'm saying is, when we praise God, it is for our faith now in what's going to happen, what we believe is going to happen. Does that make sense? Because if you glorify God based solely upon the events that are happening in the world, what happens to that? Right? Right? I mean, then, then you have to have times when you're not only not glorifying God, but you're cursing God. Correct? Correct? Yeah, totally correct. Okay, another thing, the throne. And this is really important for Reformed theology. This is where Calvin got his understanding of the sovereignty of God, which is the very pinpoint, the beginning point of Reformed theology. The throne. God and Christ are in ultimate control. We talked about determinism as a major theme, especially in Christian theology. That God and Christ are in, or in Christian apocalypse, that God and Christ are in ultimate control to a good end. Ergo, therefore, what happens to us is happening for a purpose. The whole idea of the purpose-driven life, the whole idea of the purpose-driven church, the whole idea of what we talk about, predestination. We have a purpose, a meaning. Things don't just happen by coincidence, okay? If tomorrow night you win that lottery prize, if a Christian wins it, that was one for a purpose, and you need to be thinking what that purpose is. Right? I mean, there it is. It's not a fate. It's not fate. If it's a Christian, if a Christian deals with that, they have to ask themselves first, now why? Why did this happen to me? How do I have to understand this in the context of God's purpose? For me, for the church, for the world. We look at everything through that point of view. And that's to proclaim that God is sovereign. God's in charge. We are not at the whim of fate. Things happen. We are in a story that's ongoing. We are a part of a story that has a vector, a purpose, a direction. That's what we believe. And John holds that up, builds that. And then when Calvin studied the Revelation and Paul, and he went, God is sovereign. And that's the first thing we've got to hold up. And again, that was over and against what some elements of medieval Roman Catholicism was saying. Medieval Roman Catholicism was saying, which was, you know, if you do this A, B, C, D, E that the church tells you to do, you'll be saved. And, you know, the reformer said, no, God's in control. It's God who makes that decision, not us. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So it really empowers the church. That point of view empowers Christians. Okay, the next thing, to encourage and admonish Christians to remain faithful. We have to remain faithful no matter what we face. I mean, it would be real easy to give up our beliefs if we did not see the vector of God's purpose in the world. It would just to say, well, forget it. And a lot of people do that. So many terrible things have happened to me. So many terrible things have happened in the world. There cannot be a God. It cannot exist. God cannot exist in these terrible things. So Revelation was written to encourage and admonish Christians to remain faithful, especially in John's time when horrible things were happening to believers. And there were a lot fewer of them than there are now. They were in, this right here would have been one of the churches. Right here. Might have been one of the churches. Yeah. 10 people. Maybe less. Maybe 20. Maybe 30. But that was about, the size of these churches were very small. They were not large. Especially in Asia Minor. They were not large churches. The one having ears, let him hear. There's the parabolic nature of Revelation. Picking up on Christ. See, that broke away from Jewish Bible. That's picking up on Christ. Christ used parables. So when you see the phrase, and you'll see this phrase probably a certain number of times, probably 4, maybe 7, maybe 28, but you'll see the one having ears, let him hear. And that's what Jesus said. So there are parables. There's a parabolic level. Patience and trust, and then we talked already about the sovereignty of God. Okay? So that gets us ready to go into, let's see, now where do we get to? Okay. Oh, I wanted to, let's see, I got a little bit more. Let me see where we're going with this. Okay, we'll pick this up. It's time to stop. We'll pick this up next week. This is a part of the prologue. Let me go back and see. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's it. We're ready. We're ready to start. Bring your Bibles next week. This is where we're going to start. Chapter 1, 1 through 20, superscription, verses 1 through 3. And we're going to pick that apart. Okay? Now, we're not going to be going that slow as we get into the later, like we get into the 7 churches, we can move those pretty quick. But when we start off, we're going to kind of pick things apart a little bit to understand what John is saying here. So we start next week, okay? Okay? Any questions about that? All right, then let's have a word of prayer, and we will conclude for today. We'll have some breakfast, okay, or brunch. Lord, we thank you so much again for this beautiful day. Bless and be with us, and keep us safe, and be with those, Lord, who have been watching at home. And we pray, Lord, you'd help us to continue to deepen our understanding of Revelation, especially as we begin with the text, Lord, next week. That we would wrestle with what John would have us wrestle with and understand what we can learn and apply for our lives. Thank you for giving us our time together. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Come back safely next week. Okay, please.